So just want to introduce yourselves to all the voices. Don't worry, this is not something.
Introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
I am Jody Boyman, the elder sibling.
The elder sibling.
Uh-huh.
You
The
can't
eldest.
tell though, can you?
Does that make you the more responsible sibling?
Of course.
Okay.
The first child always is.
Yes, I'm the first child, and I
Yes.
concur that is correct.
Yes, exactly.
And you are the...
I'm the only brother, younger to Jody, Todd. Yeah.
So there's three of you.
Yes, there is.
Kim is the youngest.
You came in as the youngest?
She should have joined us, actually.
She'd be
She's a
great.
vegan as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And an OBGYN of 40 years.
Wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, siblings, Jody, Todd, you are also connected by founding a business together. Is that right? Tell me about that. Whose idea was it?
Yeah, I think it sprung out from both of us.
Okay.
Right? I think because we've been vegans for so long, Jody largely as an activist, me just as not eating, animal products and trying to avoid wearing them. I think we started with the idea of asking ourselves the question of, could you recreate what everyone loves to eat, which is meat, and could you do it from plants? And it was just a conversation that we had, and we met some like-minded individuals and thought we could make this happen. So we, started chatting and said, let's go for it. And let's create the best meat on the planet from plants.
Okay. So how does somebody go from not being in the plant-based food industry to being in it? Do you start with an interest in food, or are you good in the kitchen, or do you just like to see what you can fashion out of plants? So where does that sort of inspiration come from?
Well, first of all, the big leap is getting into the food industry to begin with, right? So neither of us came from the food industry.
Okay.
So I came out of the tech industry. And Jody had some family businesses that she ran. So neither of us had a clue about how to do a food business. So that is the most difficult transition, because understanding how the food economy works is really complex. And there's a reason the food business aggregates up, right, to the largest companies. So trying to launch something small in the food business is really difficult. So once you make that leap and you say specifically what we want to do is meat made from plants, you need to find really smart people who are going to share that passion, who bring culinary expertise, who bring food science expertise, and bring the different pieces that you need. And then you need to build a team to make all that happen.
Mm-hmm. And how long ago was this when you first established?
It was about 7 years ago when we first started talking about it.
Okay.
And as a longtime activist of many, many decades, it really started as a passion project. And I don't know really a lot about food. I've been eating plant-based for many, many decades, but food itself isn't so much of a passion for me, but making the world a better place is. And when we started kicking around ideas, I thought, you know what? Food is the biggest common denominator for making change. And to that end, we thought we need to start a business and we need to change people's behavior through their food choices, and thus bend the curve on personal and planetary health, which is our mission statement. So we embarked on that journey not knowing a whole bunch about food, and we got educated really fast. And we surrounded ourselves with people who've had decades of experience in the food industry. So we brought the passion and the commitment and the tenacity, and they brought the knowledge and the know-how and helping us with the roadmap of how to put all those pieces together. It was definitely a joint effort.
Do you think that's played an important part in your success, is the fact that you founded the business not based on, I just want to find a way to, make money or have an impact doing something around food, to, what you said, which is, I want to make the world a better place, and maybe this is how I can do it?
Oh, yes, it would have been very hard to have shouldered this lift if we didn't have the passion in our bellies for it. It's a lot of hard work, one step at a time, but it's also incredibly fulfilling to see all those flexitarians out there that are gravitating towards it and who thank us for our burgers and all the other meats that we make because they can't taste the difference. and they can cook meals and have everybody sit around the table and eat the same thing. It just makes life really easy for people that are leaning plant-based and trying to introduce more plants into their diet. It's sort of a gateway towards a healthier way of eating. And yeah, we get a lot of compliments from people who are like teetering on the edge, curious, plant curious, people that are wanting to make that change. And we make it easy to take that next step and incorporate all that into their family favorite recipes. You know, it's a one-to-one swap, super easy.
It is.
Yeah, and I think, when we started, truly it was a kind of philanthropic mission that how can we make a difference here? And one of the earliest tests that we did was Santa Barbara Unified School District, where we met Nancy Weiss, who was the director of food service there, not a vegan, not a vegetarian, and Jody sought her out. Nancy tasted the food and she's like, okay, I can't get my head around what I'm tasting. This is just flat out good food. I'd love to serve it to K through 12 in Santa Barbara. And that's about 15,000 students, right? And this was about 7 years ago. People still were like, plant-based meats made from plants. What is that? Are those animals that you're feeding plants to? People had no idea what it was. And Nancy brought this to this community of students and started off with 3 items. By the end of the year, she was doing over 30 items. And we just kept on, our commitment to Nancy was, we'll just ship you pallets of food, do whatever you want. And she kept on ordering pallet after pallet after pallet. At the end of the year, we said, Nancy, how did this go? Because it was kind of a philanthropic venture as far as we were concerned. Right. And she said, I calculated the total number of meals I served in Santa Barbara Unified School District in the academic year, and I'd served 2 million meals. 1 million of them were Hungry Planet. Not by design, but just the food was really good. So I think, coming back to that question, it started as a passion project, as kind of this mission project. We had tests like that started to demonstrate 7 years ago, this food is really good and it can serve a broad audience. And then it was, okay, we need to figure out how to commercialize this and make it money at it, because you can give away a lot of food to K-12 school districts and make a lot of difference. But unless you're the federal government, you really can't afford to do that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, making money is still important there. You have to be able to stay afloat. And it's a tough business to be in because, I think during your tenure, plant-based foods have seen an increase in popularity, but they've also faced a lot of hurdles and struggles as kind of misinformation gets spread about them, which you may know a lot about. So I'm sure I know the answer to this already, but has it been an easy ride or has it been really, really hard?
Yeah, it's been a lot more difficult, I think, than we thought it was going to be. Again, not coming from the food industry and having no idea kind of this irrational exuberance that would build around this category, where it seemed like during a 24-month period about 4 years ago, every other day there was a new plant-based meat company getting launched, right? So a lot of people, I think, opportunistically thinking this is a gold rush, let me get into it. Most of them also didn't know anything about the food industry. They probably, for the most part, weren't necessarily ethically aligned. They just saw entrepreneurially, this is an interesting category. And the numbers are that there were over 1,000 plant-based meat companies launched over about a 24-month period. So that creates a really chaotic, very noisy environment. And on one hand, it was good because it was in the press all the time. So when Jody was out making our earliest sales 7, 8 years ago, people be, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. Now everybody knows what we're talking about. So that's huge, right? I mean, that was a multi-billion-dollar lift by all these companies and all these VCs to educate the market. But now it's kind of calmed down because a lot of the food was rushed to market. The formulas that we developed had been under development for 20 years. So we knew that the food was really good. We had certified master chefs on it. So yeah, there was a lot of noise. There was a lot of difficulty. That noise has died down, but there's an education that lasts. And people now are looking for really good food. And so when they taste our food, more often than not, the reaction is, okay, so who are you and where have you been? And so we're in wonderful universities like Harvard University. We're in Legoland. We provide the U.S. military. We're in some wonderful venues making a difference because our focus has always been on spectacular food. Yeah. And just being patient, right? Making sure that weren't kind of this flashing star, but we really wanted to make a difference for the long term.
It's so important though, isn't it? It's got to taste good. It's simply that. It's got to be good. People have got to like it enough, not just to say, yeah, that's a decent replica for a beef burger. They have to say, that's amazing, that's so good, I want to know when I can have it again.
Yeah. It's that, but it's also demonstrably better nutritionals, and I think a lot of those early products that came to market were not very nutritious. They were loaded with saturated fat like conventional meat is. Ours has 0. We have 10 ingredients. Others have 20, 25, 30 ingredients in theirs. So over that amount of time that we were working, we were reducing our ingredient deck because we had spent so long in the kitchen that we could simplify it. That's harder, right, than throwing a lot of things at it. So it has to be absolutely mouthwatering delicious. You got to have it again. It has to be demonstrably nutritious, and it has to be so much better for the environment. And I think especially with younger people, if you can show them the metrics about the plant-based meats that they're eating, and in our case, our meats save 90% on CO2, 90% on fresh water, and 75% on land. That's a win-win, So you get something that's great tasting, great for the environment, and of course, you're cutting down on all the animals that are having to be killed to be eaten.
Right.
Which, as we know, is about 80 billion or more terrestrial animals a year, never mind all the aquatic ones. So we're really trying to see how can we reduce that number. I mean, we're not even feeding 8 billion people right now. People are starving globally with 80 billion animals that we're killing per year. So how do we up that nutrition game and take less of a toll on our environment and our health and the animals themselves?
So you've touched on some things there that people seem to be now more concerned with than ever, which is the planet and sustainability, which is world hunger and feeding people, which is, animal rights and welfare and good nutrition, being healthy. We realize now that what we eat has so much to do with our health outcomes in life and our longevity and our wellness. So let's talk about the name, Hungry Planet. To me, that says you want to feed people, but also that you care about how you do it and respecting the world around us. Is that kind of along the lines of why you picked that name?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we were looking for something that wasn't necessarily focused on plant-based meats. So it's not Hungry Planet Meats, right? It's how do you feed, how do you nourish the planet? How do you feed and nourish and regenerate the human body with really healthy, delightful food? And I think when you look at these issues that we're talking about, when Jody and I first started eating vegan, and Jody before I did, I was the slow learner in the family. The data was out there and it was compelling, but with social media and our ability to collect and crunch and analyze data, it's absolutely overwhelming today, right? I mean, it's impossible not to understand these existential problems that we're facing. And so we just wanted to kind of acknowledge that we are trying to feed a hungry planet. And when you look at some of the most recent data, I think recently The Economist and Bank of America came out with a report that stated that in the next 40 years, as a planet, we're going to have to produce more food in the next 40 years than we have consumed collectively over the past 10,000 years. Let that sink in for a minute. That's extraordinary. In 40 years, the next 40 years, we need to produce more food than we have produced and consumed in the past 10,000 years total. So that's what we're about, right? It's feeding a hungry planet, and that problem is massive. And we're just one small piece of that. And so the name is kind of to acknowledge that issue, and hopefully is an encouragement to others to lean in, do their part, whether it's consuming these foods or spinning up businesses that help to address this issue.
And it sounds like even if people want to stick their head in the sand and pretend that there isn't going to be a crisis for feeding the planet and protecting the planet, at some point it's going to confront them, and it's going to confront them hard, and then very difficult choices will have to be made.
Yeah.
And
really.
It already is in many parts of the world, right?
Yeah.
We're already seeing the effects of climate change. It was 140 degrees, 40, in Dubai last week, right? I mean, it's withering. And then they had the floods a few months ago where cars were floating down the streets. So it is ironic that the Gulf states, which produce all the oil that's leading to climate change, is getting hit very, very hard with extreme temperatures and flooding and all of that right now. But we all shoulder the responsibility, and especially in the developing world where we have these choices to make, right? And as my kids were growing up, you know, they were like, well, what do we eat, Mom? And we would go and we would eat ethnic foods. We would eat Thai food and Japanese food and Indian food and all these different foods, because in those cultures, often meat is just a little tiny garnish or something on the side. So it was a great way to talk to them about most people globally eat a plant-forward diet. And it's only those of us in the Western world that put the meat center of the plate, and then we put the little veggies and stuff around the edges. And we need to flip that script if we're going to survive on this planet.
And at every meal too, because it was only 60, 70 years ago where we ate as much meat in a week as now the average person does in a day, because it was expensive, you know, it took a long time to produce, a lot of resources to produce, as it still does. But, you know, we're now finding very ethically questionable ways to do that. And so, you know, we didn't crave it as much as we do now. And now people do. They're of the mindset that a meal isn't complete unless it has some meat at the center of it, or dairy products. People feel like hard done by if they get to a buffet table and there's no meat left. I hear it all the time. Like, what am I going to do? There's no beef. It's like...
Well, it is the standard American diet, correct? So I call it the SAD diet, because with the SAD diet, you get the SAD diseases, which we are riddled with in this country. Any prosperous nation that eats a lot of meat, we're riddled with these kinds of diseases, of heart disease and diabetes and obesity and all these hypertension, all these things. So, you know, I think when we were growing up, our mother is Swiss, and she just thought, this is what the federal government is telling me, right? The standard American diet is I give you 4 ounces of meat and we put everything else around the side. And I would just push everything away and not eat that pork chop. And my sister would put it in her mouth and go to the bathroom and spit it out in the toilet. You know, like we were revolting from a very young age, and she just couldn't figure out why we would not sit down and eat. She thought she was doing the right thing, right? And most parents raising their kids feel like they're doing the right thing by including all of this conventional meat in their kids' diets, when in fact it's sabotaging our children's health from a very young age. You know, they're starting to find out that kids as young as 8 and 10 have hardening of the arteries, and, you know, prediabetes and diabetes in our school systems. And we've never seen that before in previous generations.
So, but just to be clear, Jody and my younger sister, Kim, weren't quite that delicate in refusing to eat these things. They would get served and they would look at my mom and go, so who did this used to be?
So that's very perceptive. Okay, so take me back. How old were you at this point when you were making these perceptions?
So I think that who did this used to be, staring at the pork chop on my plate, probably started around 10 or 11.
Okay.
And then it was sort of a full court press with my mother, who is very Swiss and very like, this is what you're going to do. And I didn't know any other vegans. I didn't know any other vegetarians. I'm not even sure if the term vegan was invented back then. And we were growing up in the Midwest where everybody ate meat. Like I was being so rebellious, you know.
Yeah. And do you remember this time? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, it was...
Jody being this naughty little girl who wouldn't eat her pork chops?
I was being obstinate.
I'm like, you know, in the U.S., it was always pork chops and applesauce, right? I mean, that was just kind of thing. It's like, yeah, bring it on. I mean, at that age, I had no problem with that. I was like, what's going on with my 2 sisters?
It tastes good, and they're being weird.
Yeah.
Right, which I think, most kids would say.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And to this day, still say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why it's incumbent on us as vegan parents of vegan children to give our kids foods that don't ostracize them. Right? And so I had my kids in 2000 and 2002. And back then there was sort of like the Gen 1 plant-based meats, like the Gardeins and the Morningstar Farms and the Tofurkeys. And a lot of parents were staying away from that. And I thought, there's so many birthday parties they have to go to, and they have to bring their school lunch boxes. And I don't want them to feel like they're on the outside looking in and they're stigmatized. So I would send them with the deli meat, sliced sandwiches, and they would go to the birthday parties with their vegan burgers and stuff. And then inevitably other parents and kids would come over and want to know about it, and it would become a topic of conversation and curiosity. And then some mothers would go, well, I'm going to go buy that Morningstar Farm and
So you
do that.
would send your kids with kind of like a meat replica so that they felt like they fitted in visually?
Yes, not always, but certainly to birthday parties,
Right.
which you are raising a 2.5-year-old. Let me tell you, you've got thousands of these ahead of you.
Oh, yeah.
Thousands. And so stock up your freezer, make sure you have the veggie dogs and the veggie burgers and, all of that stuff, because then they can just come in, put it on the grill with everybody else's stuff. You'll have to self-supply usually, although that's changing over the last 2 decades. A lot of parents will now provide that at these gatherings, but we were BYO, bring your own. We would just hike it in and in the lunch boxes, peanut butter and jelly sandwich or hummus and chips. But sometimes it would be, deli slices. Those tofurkey deli slices are fantastic. I still eat them to this day.
It's particularly worrying, isn't it, that not only as a vegan do you have to worry about the food at kids' birthday parties or at the school dinner table, but even just as a health conscious parent, you still have to worry about those things, because the foods associated with kids today are predominantly ultra processed junk foods. I go to the parties and I never see anything, I say living, I don't mean in an animal sense, but fresh, that was grown. It's always very processed. It's very hard to find, a piece of fruit or a nice salad or anything like that. And, I think parents today would argue, well, kids don't like that stuff. But that's a problem. Surely they could like that stuff if they were introduced to it more often.
They're not raised with it, right? They're not raised with it. And you have to introduce that level of fun and creativity with kids from the youngest age to eat the rainbow, right?
Right.
Come into the kitchen. Let's play with it. Let's have lots of fruits and lots of veggies. And my kids used to play all the time with me in the kitchen. And also, kids watch what you're doing much more carefully than what they listen to. So if you sit down with them and you normalize those foods and you eat those foods from their youngest remembrance, then it's not weird to them, and then they become very confident in eating those foods, even when they're around kids that are eating, this standard American diet full of all this junk. You find that those kids want the grapes and the strawberries and, the carrot sticks and all that stuff. Well, it's very true.
It's this exposure. And I didn't realize this so much until I went and lived in Spain for 8 years. And when I was in Spain, I watched all these kids running around eating olives as if they were candy, right? And I thought a British kid would never run around eating olives. They would be like, ew, olives. So why is it that Spanish kids love eating olives? And it's just, as you say, because they've watched their parents do it, because it's normalized, and therefore, to them, it's a fun food.
Yeah. We used to put them on our fingertips. That's how our mother, so we would walk around with 10 olives and eat them off, and it was a lot of fun. And so I did that with my kids too. So my kids love olives, love them.
So I guess your vegan journey started when you were very young.
Yes.
And yours, Todd, a little bit later?
The trailing sibling.
Yes. How long did it take you to see the light?
A long time.
Well, it's difficult when you have an older sister and a younger sister who kind of, are sandwiched. You're sandwiched in between.
They were both vegans, right? They'd both gone vegan, and you were the outlier.
Yeah. And I'm just the slower learner in the family, and so I kind of.
It's nice that you can admit that.
You just admit it, right? You roll with it, and it's like okay.
Have our faults.
But ultimately, it was towards my senior year of university.
Okay.
And, my sisters got to the point where I couldn't even vacation with them anymore. I mean, those people who can just be obnoxious and they just kind of hit you over and over again. But this has been going on for close to a decade in my case, right? So eventually I was like, okay, Jody, Kim, make your best argument. Because I like to be somewhat data-driven.
Okay.
He's very, very data-driven. Very. And you were requesting this information before the internet, before most of the books on veganism.
So now she's dating us, right?
I imagine Jody rose very well to that challenge.
And Kim, our sister.
So between
footnoted and papers and peer-reviewed, but it was not easy because it wasn't on the internet. The internet had not.
Yeah, so I think it was like leading up to a Christmas. It was probably leading up to a Christmas vacation. I was like, I want to hear your best argument before we get together because I don't want to be talking about this over Christmas.
Right.
Let's just enjoy each other's company, right? And so sure enough, I get bombarded with very well curated arguments in the three buckets that you would expect, right? So there is the environmental element, there is the health element, the human health, and there's the animal welfare. At this point, I'm 21. And so the animal welfare piece, animal agriculture wasn't back then what it is today.
Right.
So it was abhorrent, but it wasn't at the scale that it was today, right?
Right. No way. Yeah.
So for me, it was kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
But the environmental piece, I was like, wow, that's amazing, right? So the fact that a pound of beef takes 600 gallons of water, that's extraordinary to me.
Right.
I was like, that doesn't compute, right? And there weren't alternative meats made from plants back then where it's a tenth of that. So there wasn't that comparison, but there was just like, that makes no sense. I mean, basically you looked at a burger and you said, that is the coal of the food system, right? I mean, it's pollutive, it's extractive. That doesn't make sense. So that really resonated with me. And they just had a whole bunch of different pieces there. The human health piece, again, when you're 21 and you're fairly healthy and you're an athlete, okay, anything in moderation. But then I started to see processed meats, recently identified as carcinogens by
Class 1 carcinogens.
By the USDA.
Yeah.
So again, Jody and Kim were way ahead of their time. They knew where to go find that data. So I just checked all those boxes. I said, okay, that makes sense. Here's the problem, gals. I don't like tofu. I don't like veggies.
I hear this a lot, right? So, you think I have to like tofu to be vegan.
Yeah. So what am I going to do?
What are you going to do?
Yeah. So
there's nothing else to eat.
So Kim, who was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, I flew her out to San Diego where my wife and I were living. And I said, what am I going to eat? And so she took me shopping. And back then it was a lot more difficult to figure out, well, how are you going to eat these things? And again, part of the reason for Hungry Planet, right? Let's give people what they love. Let's make it really easy for those who want to lean in. Even if it's just a meal a week, let's make it easy. You don't have to learn new recipes. You don't have to change your palate. Over time, I think what people find is that they use something like Hungry Planet as kind of the gateway to eating differently. Right. And then they start realizing, oh my goodness, there are all these other wonderful things that you just hadn't paid any attention to in the shopping aisle because you'd always been conditioned to look for different things.
Right. And it's so true because there's so many foods that I eat now on a daily basis that I'd never eaten at all in my 30 years of life before going vegan. Right. Things like kale and nutritional yeast and tofu and making cream sauces out of cashews and so many nice things, right? But I think it's fair to say that it's not easy for everybody. I think if you are someone who is very culinary and you like your veggies and you like all these different foods and flavors and try new things, then it's going to be easier. But if you're someone who has eaten a very certain way for a long period of time, it's not going to be that easy to suddenly go and eat completely differently and also know where to find the ingredients to allow you to do that. So as you say, having that gateway to eat similarly to the way you have done, but in a way that doesn't harm the planet and your own health and animals so much is so important.
Yeah, and I think in our lives, we often live our lives with blinders. We just have certain patterns that we fall into. And food is one of those. I know, having been a vegan for about 10 years before the arrival of my first child, as that child grew up in our neighborhood, I had no idea that we actually had McDonald's and Burger Kings around until in 2002, Burger King launched their BK Veggie. I thought, I wonder if we have any of those nearby. Well, sure, we had them all over the place, but I had my blinders on because they didn't have anything for us to eat.
Right.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who at that point I think was about 6 years old, she only knew of Burger King and McDonald's as rest stops when we were driving across country and a place where you had a playground. She had no idea there was really food there because we never ate there. And we took her into Burger King to offer her first BK Veggie. And she was just like, what is this place? I thought it was a rest stop and a play zone to actually serve food, because our blinders were on and she just, it wasn't a place that she interacted with. It was funny when she ordered, I'll take a BK Veggie, please. And the woman gave it to her. She goes, I don't eat my animal friends. And the person behind the counter was just like, get out of here, get away from here. So she had a bit of her ants in her, right? She was going to let people know exactly how she felt about her food choices.
Yeah. It's funny, people have said to me in the past, like, oh, you don't eat meat? Like, don't you miss Chick-fil-A? And I'm like, well, I've never eaten in a Chick-fil-A because I haven't eaten chicken in 32 years. Yeah. And so that was before Chick-fil-A was here, right? Or I had access to it. So yeah, it just doesn't, it's not a loss to me because I was never there, which is nice. But my parents are moving towards veganism now. They've been vegetarian for a while. And my dad actually is looking at McDonald's differently for the first time. And he said to me recently, you know, I heard somebody say, oh, we're going to, if you're good at school this week, we'll treat you and take you to McDonald's on Friday. And he said, I thought to myself, I used to do that. I used to take you from McDonald's for a treat as a reward of some sort. And now I think, how strange is that? Because I'm rewarding you with something that is bad for the planet, bad for animals, and actually very bad for you. So it's almost like it should be a punishment. He says, isn't it weird that, you know, that's kind of the mindset you get into, thinking of these bad things as a reward, and I guess that's
a treat.
A treat
when it's sabotaging.
Yes,
everything.
Sabotaging treats.
Our health.
Yeah.
And the planet and the animals is sabotaging across the board.
Yeah.
Well, at Hungry Planet, we often talk about that veto vote. And trying to court that, you know, because we are food service forward. And so, you know, most restaurants need to have, like you were saying with Burger King, need to have something there. When there's a friend circle, at least one person in a group of 4 is going to be actively searching for that plant-based option. And if you, as a operator, are not providing that, that group of diners is going to go down the street, even to Burger King, because there's something there for the vegan or vegetarian.
Right.
And I think, you know, with our range of 9 protein types, you know, those operators are just embracing it because they're like, wow, we can create, you know, vegan lasagna, and then you all will come to the restaurant. And the other people may or may not eat it, but at least then the group comes,
can go. Yeah.
Right? And so that's the key, is that these chains and other, you know, standalone restaurants, and even the high-end ones like Craig's down the street that carries a lot of Hungry Planet, it gets people in the door,
right,
and exposes them to this, and then more people will choose it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. If my daughter was invited to a birthday party somewhere where there wasn't anything she could eat, I would just not go because it would be very difficult.
Yes,
and all they need is one option, and then I'm like, great, we have an option.
Yeah,
we can go, and we can, you know, be part of this group thing, which is so important.
It is so important to not feel ostracized as a young person. Well, we're social animals. None of us want to feel ostracized. And that's why Hungry Planet is so great. You can't tell that I'm eating it. Any dish that we prepare, it looks like conventional meat.
Yeah.
And if you tasted it, you wouldn't know that it was made from plants.
You have to double check with the stuff.
You do.
I was like, are you sure?
Are you? Yeah.
Definitely check. Yeah. So I know the answer to this already, I think. But when it came to raising your own children, you're already vegans. So was it therefore, I'm guessing, an easy decision to say, I'm going to raise my children vegan as well? Or were you concerned about them being ostracized or, you know, anything like that?
Well, it starts first when you're deciding to have a kid, right? And I decided at 38 to have my first and 40 to have my second. So my healthcare providers who were conventional were like, we're not sure about that. Like, you probably should be drinking dairy. You should probably be eating meat. You're going to be deficient in all of this. And I said, I got this. Like, no problem. Have you seen Dr. Spock's, you know, baby and child book, right? Which sold second only to the Bible in terms of the amount of copies that are out there.
Okay.
And in his 7th edition, before he died at 94, he says, we should all be raising our children plant-based. He used the word vegan because plant-based wasn't coined back when he passed away. And, you know, he's the most famous pediatrician in the world. And to have him come out with that gave me a lot of confidence. And, you know, and then I breastfed each kid for a year each, which helped, I thought, with their immune system and all of that. And so I was fully committed. In fact, I was not going to have children if I wasn't able to raise them 100% plant-based. I was super committed to that. And that's, I think, why I was a fencer for so many years, is I thought, what are the pros? What are the cons to having children? Does the planet really need more individuals? okay, well, I'm going to have them, but they're not going to contribute to the problem and the suffering, right? They're going to come and be ambassadors for change, for the good.
Right.
And, my son is 6'7" and, raised 100% plant-based, and not that height is, the metric for health, but he's certainly, blew through all of his
well, it certainly
metrics.
debunks the common myth that, vegan children are shorter and stunted in some way.
Exactly. Exactly. He's like my poster child. I just walk down the street with him, vegan. And they're like, ooh, okay.
So you have two healthy, grown vegans. How old are they now?
24 and 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Todd, would you?
The younger brother got started a little earlier.
So it's an interesting question, right? Because you wonder how many omnivore couples sit down and say, should we raise our children as omnivores?
Yeah, that
right?
is.
Because that's almost really the question that should be asked. Because when you understand the data, that's where you ought to be thinking, okay, we're about to bring a life onto this planet. What's the best for them? That's probably the time to take a deep breath and go, well, maybe we should be thinking about what we eat. Right,
because I think there must be conversations where parents say, we're going to raise our kid healthily, right? We're going to not allow them to have, I don't know, Coca-Cola until they're 5 or something like that.
Cheez-Its.
Or cigarettes,
And what kind of values do we want our children to grow up with?
Food is an extension of that.
It's a direct reflection of the values that you have.
And food is medicine. I mean, at its most fundamental.
But not recognized so much so.
But it should be. It is absolutely fundamental medicine. Food is medicine, and I say that to my kids all the time.
Yeah, I mean, very clearly, right? I mean, we are fed by food companies that don't pay attention to our health, right? And our health is taken care of by institutions that don't pay attention really to what we eat. So you got a bit of a problem there. And that needs to be fixed, right? Our health institutions need to better help educate people about how your dietary choices make a difference. And our food companies need to not just engineer food so that they're addictive, but so that they actually are helpful to what we do.
Nourishing.
Yeah.
Nourishing.
Yeah, so as a parent, in my case, my wife was also a vegan, and we were well versed in the data because had two sisters.
The formal presentation.
and had pounded it into a decade or so earlier. So it wasn't really a conversation. It was like, yeah, this is what you ought to be doing.
And you'd come of it from a sustainability. Well, that had been kind of the most compelling part for you, because I know with Jody, it was very much the ethics. For you, initially, at least, it was very much the environmental component of how much more better for the planet it was. Yeah. So is that a key driver making the decision with your children, or?
Well, no, I mean, for us, it wasn't really a decision for the children. It just, that's what you were going to do. So
that's how we ate.
There was never a decision point. It's like, look, kids very naturally are going to eat really whatever you serve them.
Well, yes.
And so that's what they're going to eat. And they also very naturally love animals and plants and nature, right? And so of their own volition, they're not going to say, hey, Mom and Dad, I've got too many vegetables and tofus and other things. Can I go slaughter a cow today? I mean, that probably isn't going to happen, right?
Probably not.
So, as a matter of fact, when Tessa, our youngest, was about 4 and Zoe is a couple of years older, we were on a road trip somewhere, and Tessa just out of the blue said, so is God a vegetarian? Well, what an interesting question from a 4-year-old, right? And without hesitation, Zoe, our eldest, who would have been 7, said, of course God is. Why would she eat her own creations, right? I mean, just the innocence of these young thought thinking, my goodness, we love life, right? We're embracing life. And so I think over time, I've realized as well that, yes, I started, my consciousness was open to it through environmental reasons. But if you really are going to love life, right, and you're going to love your neighbor and you're going to love your human family, you probably ought to extend that to your food choices as well. So the ethical side certainly resonates deeply with me now. It wasn't what got me started, but you can only absorb so much when you are being bombarded with data.
It's exactly
right?
the same with my husband. For him, it was kind of one of those ones where I do care about animal suffering, but what's really hitting me hard right now is that I wasn't taught this stuff about how food impacts the planet in school. Like, this seems like it should be part of our scientific
curriculum.
education. Yeah, it's so important. And he's very mathematical. So for him, it was, definitely those numbers. And then the ethical stuff kind of came later. But I think everything starts to fall into place, doesn't it, when you redirect and you're on a certain path, other components are allowed in for the first time, and you suddenly see the bigger picture.
Starts to click.
Yeah.
And I know with what you're doing with GenV, you've got a global audience, right? And it is interesting how different places in the world lead with different arguments, different cases for why you would do this.
Right.
So in Europe, it is much more about the environmental issue. They're much more tuned into that in Europe than they are here in the United States. In the United States,
I like to think they are.
It's a little more me-centric, right? It's about my health.
Yes.
And what am I going to do to live forever? But the fact of the matter is you can access this from so many different ways.
Right.
And what people don't want to do is be preached about. It's like, just look at the data, figure out what makes sense for you. And ultimately, once you realize there's amazingly good food, we all come into this planet vegan. And it's only through our societal conditioning that we start eating other foods. You just start discovering there are amazing foods out there, and it helps the planet, it helps yourself, and it's kind of just a better way to eat.
That's 40 minutes for you.
Thank you. Well, I have to ask, are all of your children still vegan? Are they glad they were raised vegan? What are their thoughts on veganism now?
In our family, it's actually not something that we talk about because it was really not something that we spoke about all that often.
Right.
Because it was just what you ate, right? And I think both of my daughters would kind of look at other people and like, why would they eat that, right? It's just, to them, it was the complete opposite of how most people look at it. For them, it's like, of course, I'm not going to eat animal products. And so I don't even quiz them on it today, what they're doing. I know when we go out to eat, we all eat the same things we always ate before.
Because it's your normal,
it's
which
just
is beautiful.
It's the normal piece of what they do. And I think there was always that question of, when they go off to university, are they going to find that their way to rebel is to say, hey, Mom, Dad, let's go, welcome to town, let's go to a steakhouse. That didn't happen, right? They rebelled in different ways, and we got through that.
Oh, yeah.
But,
They will.
Buckle up.
Buckle up.
It's coming.
It does happen. But they didn't choose food because I think for them it was just so natural. It's like, okay. And quite frankly, as parents, we kind of look at it and go, all right, well, if that's what you're going to do, go for it. But they kind of realize that would be a silly thing to rebel against.
Right. You've got to want to rebel in that direction. You've got to be intrigued by it for sure.
Yeah.
I know loads of parents that have raised vegan children who have just never had that interest.
Yeah.
And then there's others that do have the interest, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just a different person. We're all just different people taking different paths.
And I think probably as a parent, the question of are they still vegan isn't so much of even a question or concern that we have internally, but it's more the values that were instilled in them by eating that way and truly having, a love for the planet and for their fellow human beings has been reflected in what they have chosen to do. And so for me, it's much less about what are they eating and what are they doing. And what they're doing with their life, isn't selfish. It's trying to find ways to give back and to bless others.
Right.
And so for me, that's kind of the proof, right? The proof is, are they living the values that were embedded in those food choices, which we spoke about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Because our food choices do reflect our values.
They do.
And ultimately, that's what you're hoping as a parent, right? Are your children going to carry forward the values that really are universal, right? And that you're trying to impart in them? And in vegan families, one of the ways is through those food choices.
Right. And I actually wrote a piece about this, a blog about this. I like to try and address the fears that parents have over, their child being vegan. And one is that, they'll be seen as different. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, growing up, if I got an award for helping small lady across the street, or for rescuing a cat from a tree, or for doing something kind and generous, then I would get praised by my parents for that because they wanted me to be a kind and compassionate person. Mm-hmm. So surely any action, inclusive of leading a vegan lifestyle, should be praised by others. And if it's not, we need to kind of look at how we are as a society and think, why are we teasing or ostracizing somebody for making choices that are simply made out of a drive to be more compassionate and to create a more empathetic, sustainable world. Surely we should praise them. And if not, that it's not my concern if society can't praise that extension of kindness, because it's almost like we're saying, well, we'll praise some forms of kindness, but not others. We'll mock them. And that seemed very inconsistent to me. And it's like, why limit a person and say you should only be nice to rabbits, cats, dogs, horses, and you shouldn't worry about anything else? Any other animal is not worthy of consideration. That seems like we're putting restriction on kindness, and that just seems ludicrous to me. So as you say, like, if we're asking somebody to live a vegan lifestyle or leading by example in being vegan ourselves, then we're not just saying we don't want you to eat animal products or wear animal products or use products tested on animals. We're saying we just want you to be as kind as you can at every turn, inclusive of your food and clothing choices.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And I think another thing that it does by raising a child not eating animal products, it does make you in some ways a better scientist in terms of understanding data, right? And really being willing to shift your consciousness to say, okay, well, my heart tells me that I love animals. Well, fantastic. That's important. And for some people, that's enough. But for other people, it's show me the data. Do I really understand the science behind what's happening to our planet? What's happening to biodiversity? How the attacks on our biodiversity are directly tied to our food choices? How the antibiotics that go into our food system are threatening the human family's well-being over the long term. And so I think it does make you a more critical thinker to say, let's understand the science and let's critically question that science and let's understand what is it telling us, and then have the courage to actually act on that, and not say, well, I'm a little concerned that someone might think I'm a little strange because I want to eat peanut butter and jelly instead of a bologna sandwich, right? Well, it's irrelevant because you're actually thinking through the issues and you're willing to do that. And if you can learn that at a young age, I mean, think about then what you can do as an adult, right? You've learned to think critically. You've learned to think compassionately. And you've learned to take all that, shift consciousness, and actually do something about it and not just bemoan the fact that, oh my goodness, there are a lot of problems out there. I'm going to go crawl under a rock, right? I mean, that doesn't work. We all need to pick up the mantle and say, let's go do something. So I think by making these choices and working with children at a young age, it helps encourage so many things that leads to a really productive, giving life.
It's empowering, isn't it? I would say it's empowering to know that the choices you make can make a difference, particularly in relation to things that you care about.
Yes.
And I think we've realized in some cases, collectively as a society, that, if we care about our health, we probably shouldn't eat the donut. And I think that goes through almost everybody's minds when they see something like a cake on the table. They'll think, oh, do I want it enough to embrace the health kind of hit that will come with this.
Right.
And we've done it with cigarettes now and drugs. We look at them and think, is it worth what it's going to do to our health? And most times we will say no. But we're not critically thinking as much with animal products and thinking, is this product worth the suffering it caused, the health implications, and, the impact on the environment, not to mention everything else. So yeah, I think if critical thinking is so important, if we can encourage people to think critically, that's a huge step, because then at least those that do choose to still eat animal products, they're doing so with the knowledge of what the consequences are. And if they say, that's fine, those consequences don't bother me, then okay, that's your choice. But I think it's the lack of understanding.
But it's not a victimless choice.
This is true.
So from the ethical point of view, people always say, it's my choice. And I'm like, fine. But it is not a victimless choice. So think about that. And just to really challenge that cognitive dissonance that happens with people all the time in this sphere, and starting with young kids before that cognitive dissonance dials in, and allowing them to hang on to that sense of empathy and compassion for all animals from a young age, and moving forward in life with that still firm in their hearts instead of having that being dug out. And I think that's the key, is that we as parents need to protect our kids that way and say, you don't need to split that way. pet the dog, eat the cow. They're all sentient creatures. They all deserve our compassion and our love.
Well, you were talking about the pork chop earlier, and it's named a pork chop, not, the leg of a
Lamb.
pig. Well, yeah, we call them lamb chops and pork chops in the UK.
Yeah.
And it was a lamb chop for me that helped me make the connection because it had the name of the animal in the name, which is not true of most meat.
Yes.
The buffalo wings and the bacon and the pork and the
burger.
And the burger.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Euphemisms, just so you
Right.
can...
So it does actually create this subconscious even distance
Yes.
between the animal. And it was only through that actual name, I think, that I sort of said, Mom, does this actually come from a lamb?
Yes.
And at that point, that's when I made the connection between the animal and the product. And I think these names are designed to do that, unfortunately.
But even in this country, when we serve, we leg of lamb. And I was out to dinner last night, and the person to my right ordered the leg of lamb. And I've known this woman for 22 years, and I felt like saying, you realize you're actually eating a leg of a baby lamb. Have you ever hung out with a lamb before?
Well, how did that go down? Because particularly when people are eating their leg of lamb.
And I'm eating my Hungry Planet burger.
Well, fortunately, this friend wasn't her younger brother, right? Back in the day. I
Yeah,
can tell you how it used to go down.
But my point being,
feisty.
even when you name it, the body part, that dissonance is there by the time you're an adult, right? This is a wonderful, compassionate, caring woman who's been in my life for 22 years. And I just felt like saying, what are you doing? You have these other choices on the menu.
Well, even so, leg of lamb, if it was called the leg of a lamb, maybe even that would,
If you just, break it up a little bit and say it slightly differently so that it's just
I think even so, we're definitely not picturing. It's funny because if I put into a Google image search, lamb, because I want to create a social media post of a cute animal in it, I will more often than not get a picture of meat
body
on a
part.
plate, the body part, which is disturbing because it's kind of not what I was looking for and not what I wanted to see.
You were looking for the live animal.
But it's, I think that's what most people seem to be associating with that word nowadays.
Yes.
So, Naomi, we'll know that you're having your impact next time we drive through a Burger King to get a BK veggie equivalent. And they say, would you like a burger of a cow, right? Now, like, Naomi's been here already. She's rebranded you here.
Yeah. I would like to see that. And a picture of the animal from whom that came would be maybe a start.
The 100 cows that one burger contains.
Yeah.
100 cows in that 1 4-ounce
Okay,
burger.
you're grossing me out.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Well,
I want to make him
abs-
stay vegan for the rest of his life, so I have to throw
It's already going to happen. I do find that one of the interesting critiques of people who choose to eat, plant-based is this notion that it's for a small subset of society, right? And particularly if you're coming at it from the perspective of biodiversity and nature. And I think there's just a reframing of that is helpful for people to really deeply understand that, nature is not a luxury, right? It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. And understanding that, yes, it's awful to kill animals, at an industrial scale, and that this really is for everybody. Because if we destroy biodiversity, and if we take life that we don't need to be taking, and we continue to bulldoze forests, and we continue to waste perfectly good usable calories in plants to feed animals, what we're doing is we're undermining that natural platform that we all need to thrive. And I'm not sure that message gets out enough to certain sectors of society where they really think, okay, well, it's great for people who have a certain degree of empathy or a certain degree of privilege.
Or who love tofu.
Yeah, who love tofu or have come to love tofu. But really, it is a very natural choice for everybody.
Well, and we are nature. We are animals.
We are.
And most of us don't see ourselves that way. We see ourselves at the top of this pyramid, right? Instead of in a circle, right? So it's ego and then all these animals around, rather than let's all increase that circle of compassion. And we're part of this. We are nature. We are animals.
Yeah.
We're not separate. and we're all going to go down if we don't take care of our environment.
Jody, how do your kids feel about you? If I was to ask your children to describe their mom in a few words, their mom, who is the co-founder of one of the leading plant-based food brands, is one of the longest-term vegans I know, over 30 years?
Close to 50.
Close to 50, okay. I was way off there. Who has always stood very true to her values, been a very strong leader in what she believes. Do they see you in that way? Is that how they describe you, or are they you just their mom?
I don't know. I mean, they're young adults now. They're 22 and 24. I don't know how they talk about me behind my back. I probably don't want to know. But they definitely know that I lead from the heart and that I am an animal lover through and through. I was a wildlife photographer for 25 years. They know I'm passionate, I'm committed, I'm tenacious. I don't take no for an answer. I don't back down. And I really have a dichotomy because I'm an introvert, but I'm also an activist. And so those two things are often fighting against each other. But I find that actually food is activism, and I have learned that through our company. And so I'm able to experience that part of myself that is so important, that resonates with my kids, that activism part, that is just true blue. I can't not be that way. That's just how I'm wired. And so, yeah, food is activism, and they know that about me. And occasionally when they were younger, they'd be like, oh, Mom, they'd have friends over, and I'd be like, have some Hungry Planet burgers. They're not made from animals. And Milo would be like, Mom, enough already. So, you're going to have that with Scarlett. You're going to have that with your own child. But it didn't stop me. It didn't shut me up. But I would just soft pedal it a little bit more. But I like to just cook one meal for everybody. Yeah. I don't like to be in the kitchen that much. I prefer to be hiking and forest bathing and, being in nature and being with animals. That's my happy place. So when I serve people, I just want to serve the same meal that we can all feel happy and nourished to eat and not cause any harm.
So I'm getting that they would probably describe you as a slightly pushy, Hungry Planet promoting, tree hugging, nature loving, cool mom.
Yes, precisely.
Exactly.
And I will feed this back to them.
Yeah,
and there will be a test.
Let me know if I'm spot on there.
Nailed it.
Todd, what about you? How would your kids describe you, do you think?
Oh, I can tell you how.
Well, so I thought you were going to give me an opportunity to describe Jody, but...
Oh, I'll give you that opportunity. I can't wait to hear.
Oh, no. I'll be out the door.
I have no idea how they would describe me. Jody wants to describe me I truly have no idea.
How would they describe him?
Oh, my goodness. They would describe you as somebody that is... You are integrity incarnate. You don't make any decisions that are integral with your values. And it's one of the things that I most admire about you. And we got that from our parents, and our sisters the same way. Like when we get it, when we get committed, we just live it fully. So your kids see you that way. They might not always.
That's good. My brother would not have chosen his words so beautifully. Glad I asked him what he would to describe me.
Well, that's very nice. My goodness.
Yeah. Are you going to backtrack now on how you would describe Jody?
No, because...
I'm going to give you the opportunity right now.
No, not at all. I mean, look.
Describe.
Yeah. So, Jody has always had this North Star as animals first. And much to the chagrin, I think, of my parents, because a storm... Our parents, a storm comes through, the baby birds fall out of the nest, and where are they? They're in our house being fed with an eyedropper like every 60 minutes throughout the night, right? I mean, so Jody rescued more animals than I can count. I mean, and it was true from the very earliest days. And when it rains really hard in the Midwest, what happens? All the earthworms come up out of the ground and they go on the sidewalks. Where's Jody? Putting them back one at a time, right?
I
didn't have the heart to point out to her that the robins need to eat the earthworms, but she was very quickly putting them all back. So Jody has a big heart, authentically loves animals to her core. And I think a lot of people get attracted to certain causes for the theater of it and how it positions them. When Jody was starting on this journey at a young age, it wasn't for that, right? Because it was an outlier type thing. It was a deep love for animals. And that's always been the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really integral to your success, is that you are so passionate. You are so passionate about what you want to achieve. You talked about not being comfortable with being an activist. I mean, activism is any action that creates a positive impact. And that's something that you're both doing in spades. So thank you for that. And just as a last question, because I know that you can't both be as wonderful as you seem, tell me, both of you individually, we'll start with you, Todd, about one massive fail that you had as a parent, because there must have been at least one. Okay,
yeah. So I remember it very distinctly, actually. So Zoe, my eldest, before our second had arrived, she was still in diapers, but enough that she was running around and could converse, fairly well. She was doing something and she was really pushing the limit. And we just didn't do spanking in our family, right? Some families believe in it. And that just wasn't something we do. But I just was not getting through to her. We were not connecting, right? So I pulled her over and she had a diaper on. So I just gave her a little tap. Nothing more than that. She looked at me, folded her arms and looked at me and goes, "Dad, that didn't hurt." and that pushed kind of like this primal button in me. So I just pulled it down and gave her about the same level, but skin to skin. And her eyes welled up and she started to cry. "Oh, that hurt." So not my proudest moment as a father. But I mean, what a great reaction from her, right? "Dad, that didn't hurt." And so I just had to show her that I could make it sting just a little bit.
You took me right back because, spanking was big in the 80s when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And, I used to do the whole dramatic, "Oh my God, Mom, you hit me," for the lightest tap. But my brother, very much my polar opposite, would turn around and go, "That didn't hurt.
Please, sir, may I have another?"
Yeah,
yes.
Please, sir. And then my mum would be straight after him and he'd just run. Jody, what's your biggest
Oh,
fail?
gosh. Well, there's lots, of course. But one of my favorite was I was working at my computer. I had a deadline. Milo was 2.5, 3. He was really little, but verbal. And he kept coming up and approaching me. He needed something and he kept like touching me and tapping me. And I was like, "Oh, I'm busy with this thing." And finally I just like hit him lightly. I was just like a bug, like, "Get off me." And he just looked at me and he said, "Mom, it seems like you need your personal space right now."
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I was so humbled. That I got a tear in my eye and I just thought, wow, this kid is really tuned in, right?
Wow.
About this and understands. So it taught me a lesson in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am very excited about when my 2.5-year-old learns the concept of personal space. That's definitely far from what she understands right now.
She'll get it.
I'm very used to the constant tugging.
Yes.
Mom,
Right.
Mom.
And it's just like, oh, I just need to get this task done, right? But the fact that he understood that concept was at a very young age was just so humbling to me.
That's lovely. Well, thank you so much both for your time. It's been a great conversation. You know a lot about your stuff, a lot about parenting, a lot about burgers, and a lot about what it truly means to be vegan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Bye.